You're listening to Barbell Logic, brought to you by Barbell Logic Online Coaching, where each week we take a systematic walk through strength training and the refining power of voluntary hardship. Welcome to the Barbell Logic podcast. I'm here with my good friends, Andrew Jackson and Niki Sims. Last week, we came to you from a cabin in the woods.
We survived.
The
Ozarks, which
in
is
the Ozarks.
yeah,
It's true.
scary.
It's my cabin out on my rural land. This week, we come to you from a middle-class fancy Airbnb in St. Louis. Lots of...
We're living, we're laughing, we're loving.
Yeah, lots of that on the walls. Yeah, it's it's a throwback to 2003 or so in here, but nice. And so
that's great.
Here for the PBC seminar that we are putting on this weekend, and we're gonna do a little Q&A with you guys.
These are so much fun
this week. Your questions are getting better and better, and I just took a quick peek at a couple of them, and then I try to not look at all of them. Niki's seen none of these. Andrew also took a quick scan, but I actually like it when we're kind of shoot from the cuff. So question number one from Mikey on the squat at powerlifting meets. Mikey asks, why do squatters at powerlifting meets have several people spotting the lifter? Wouldn't it be better to use an overbuilt cage with steel safeties rather than to rely on 3 spotters with awkward positions and leverages?
Okay, so imagine you have a 600-pound squatter, tons of plates on the bar. Lifter cannot complete the rep. So in a normal meet, the lifter has to get spotted. And so the spotters help the lifter bring the bar back to the squat rack. If he were in a cage, the bar with all that weight could get dumped onto the pins, potentially bending the bar. And then the spotters would have to unload all the weight, put the barbell back up, and reload the weight again. So I think it protects the barbell, and I think it saves time.
That's a good answer.
Yep.
I'm not a fan of the back spotter at meets. I do understand why it's there, especially if there aren't additional safeties. I actually think the combination of both might be better.
Just in case.
As soon as humans come in, you introduce human error. And, we all squat. Most of our listeners are probably squatting on a weekly basis without spotters. I mean, how often do you actually squat with spotters? Almost never, right? And when you do, it's with safeties, and you trust that the safeties are there, and you don't miss squats very often. And certainly, powerlifting meet is a time when there are going to be more missed squats. But I do like the idea of having something mechanical there that won't fail.
And another thing I just thought of is you might have to change the safety pin heights frequently.
You definitely would.
And it's another obstacle for the judges to have to see around. And it already is pretty difficult with all the spotters there. Yeah,
so there would be an option of not using side spotters at all or spotters at all and being in a cage. And I think that the judges could actually see better, because certainly the hardest thing for the judges when you're judging squat depth is to see around the spotter.
Yeah.
But the spotter's got to be in a position where they can safely spot. And so you've got to kind of let them take their position, and then the judge has got to move around to get in a position where you can see. So that's a good question for sure.
Yeah.
I would think, having run many USSF meets and knowing that the pace of the entire event is defined by how quickly the loaders can change the bar and the pin height, that your answer is on the having to adjust the safeties, as well as the potential of having to unload and reload several hundred pounds is, I would guess that's...
It could be a pain in the booty.
Yeah, there's certainly a huge skill to be able to be a spotter loader at a meet, and specifically for the squat. So
I love that loaders exist. I am always so thankful when it's a good team of loaders at a meet that can really, like you just said, make or break a meet.
Yes.
They actually lift the most weight every time.
For sure.
They do make or break it. All right. Couple questions here from Barkley on distal bicep tendon reattachment surgery and spiders.
Okay.
Which is odd.
Like if the spider gets in during the surgery. And
I don't know if these are connected or completely separate.
Okay.
Male, 57 years old, was moving furniture last May and heard the pop. I now have a titanium button attached to my right radius.
That's cool.
So tore his distal bicep tendon, which means that bicep basically just rolls up your arm and makes your shoulder look jacked for a while. But then you got a big divot where your bicep's supposed to be.
Weird.
Now, is that one of the things that's actually stronger once it's reattached?
Well, so this is obviously I'm not a surgeon. Here's what I know. I have never heard of anyone tearing the distal bicep tendon and has that surgery where they pin it on the backside of the radius. I've never heard of it tearing again. I'm sure there's somebody out there that's done it, but yes, I think that it tends to be one of those things that's much stronger. Whereas someone that tears an ACL, we see people that have many times torn their ACL numerous times. So that's not the issue. Okay, so that is the post-op 5 months, he says. 2 months since the surgeon's clearance, been trying to ramp up the big four, plus dips to get some lightish, easy bar and dumbbell curls. The atrophy symmetry is diminishing, so it's coming back to similar size. Still have the occasional weird pains and twinges, although these are fading. Here's the question. What training recommendations would you propose to help long-term recovery? Well, I actually think we might have answered it with what you just said, which is I don't think you have to do anything different. I think that the tendon, everything is set up, in fact, much stronger now than it probably was beforehand. So I don't think
nothing you would
anything.
do would increase the integrity of the new connection of the button between your bone and your tendon. Like, there's nothing you can do. So you just have to train the muscle like you normally would.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, I wouldn't change anything. I think what I would do, and what I've started to do with all of my clients who are middle age and older as a preventative measure, is I won't let my clients who are, say, 35 and over, who are decently strong at deadlifts, I won't let them pull with the alternate grip anymore. I make them double overhand hook, or if they will never be a competitive lifter, they don't care anything about competition, I'll let them pull with straps. But I do not want someone who is 40 years old or 50 years old who deadlifts, over 405, deadlifting 405, 500, 550, pronating a hand and potentially exploding that tendon.
Supinating.
Oh, sorry, supinating that hand. Thank you. So, one's pronated, but yes, it's the supinating side that would pop.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to know for this asker of questions which arm it was for him. Was it the supinated hand?
Would it be a supinated hand? Who knows?
He was lifting furniture. Okay.
He asked an odd question about what do I do about spiders that take up residence in my garage gym and sort of live inside his rogue rack.
I'm weird in this arena. I'd leave spiders in my house.
Agreed.
Yeah.
I'm in the same.
I have no problem with
very pro
spiders.
daddy long legs. We connect on an anatomical level. And also I think they're very useful. So I just leave my spiders.
Yeah, same. I'm kind of the same way. They don't bother me too bad.
Yeah.
I don't
They
want
eat other
spider
bugs.
webs. I don't like walking through a web, especially in my face.
That's got to go. Get the Dyson out. Clear that out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the spiders don't bother me. And I think I've said this on the podcast before. And I know I said it to Sully one time when I was on the podcast, is that spiders don't actually bite people. It is incredibly rare that people get bit. Everybody thinks they get bit by a spider.
Yeah.
Right? They get this thing, they wake up, and it looks like a bite, and they're like, I was bit by a spider.
I've definitely Googled that so many times.
And you're not
and
bit
it's
by
just have acne again.
Yes. Or it's a little or it's a cyst or a little, there's little things that it is. It's almost never a spider bite.
Yeah.
If a spider bites you, we have brown recluses in the Midwest and black widows, but brown recluses are very common and they've got this
Those are the dangerous ones.
terrible reputation, right? And yet, so people are always like, I get bit by a brown recluse. And then it's like, oh, yeah, what did it feel like when it bit you?
Yeah.
Like, oh, no, I never felt it bite. I just woke up one day and I had this bite from a brown recluse. Like, what? How did you know a brown recluse bit you? You're like, well, I mean, that's just, it was just a bad spider bite that got infected, but you didn't feel it. You weren't putting on boots and it bit your foot and you were like, ouch, it bit my foot. I never felt that. Which, I mean, you think about it, it's if you're like, oh, what happened to you? Oh, I got bit by a snake. Oh, you got bit by a snake? Where did that happen? I'm not sure. I just woke up one day and I had a snake bite and it was.
This is also what happens if you say to Matt, I'm pretty sure I've had coronavirus by now.
Oh my
He's
God.
like, oh yeah? Did you?
Everybody says. Everybody tells me that they had corona. I was like, did you test positive for coronavirus? No, but I'm pretty sure back
I was pretty tired on a Tuesday.
November of 19. That's what they'll always say. They'll pull out I think I was one of the late 2019 cases. Hey, if you're listening to the podcast and you think you had coronavirus in late 2019 and You didn't.
Neither did you get bit by a black spider.
And you didn't get bit by a spider.
Brown
or a
rose.
snake.
That's exactly right. All right. Question from Zeev. Z-E-E-V.
Okay.
What do you
Cool.
think that's short for? Is it short for something?
No, nothing coming to
Steve,
mind.
but it's like a cooler version of Steve.
Yes. This would be a great question for Andrew. Question from Zeev on power cleans and keeping the arms straight.
Okay.
Hi, are the arms needed to stay perfectly straight during the transition from the jumping position to the lockout position? I would assume that means rack position, right? I have a struggle to keep them straight for some reason during the jump and into the, I think, rack position.
Cannot imagine how you would get from the jump position to the rack position without bending your arms.
Right. It would be a big loop.
I
Right.
think he could do what our first question asker did and just avulse his biceps tendons.
So here's
That would be impossible.
we'll switch the question a little bit. And it does appear that English is his second language a little bit. So he's trying hard. So I get it. It's tough to ask a question in a language it's not your first language. But there are a lot of arguments about should the arms be perfectly straight through the second pull? Let's say that instead, right? Like in the most powerful position of the pull, when the bar is theoretically moving its fastest, how important is it to have the elbows perfectly straight?
I think that it is usually better to have straight arms so that you have more efficient power transfer from your legs through your torso, down your arms to the bar. You can usually get into a better position in terms of your back angle being usually more vertical with the touch point that you have with straight arms. That said, there are some people that bend their arms and have
There are some world-class lifters.
world-class level lifters that bend their arms, and some bend their arms intentionally. Some bend their arms that are doing it subconsciously and they're just never going to be able to straighten their arms. Some will bend their arms as it's passing the knee and then it'll straighten back out to make contact with the thigh. To me, it's more of an issue of whether or not the arm bend is causing you to miss lifts that you would otherwise, or if you're not doing it consistently one way or the other, then it's probably an issue that needs to be corrected.
Yep.
But I often have been seeing when I work with clients that are just trying to figure out power cleans that there's so much concern about having perfectly straight arms that they actually get too stiff.
Yeah.
And the arms need to be more like ropes, not rods, because actually to the original problem of the question, if your arms are locked out straight when you try to jump, then you create this pivot point around your shoulder and the bar is going to have to loop far away from your body. So I'm much more interested in keeping the bar path close to the body.
Yep.
And as people get more experienced, I will actually then coach them to pull the bar back to the body.
I have a question. This is something I never really totally figured out while I was coaching these. How do you deal with bar crash? How do you coach that out of a lifter? So what I'm talking about when I say bar crash is like the weight comes up too high and then like slams into the lifter's shoulders. Is that an okay thing? Is that not a good thing?
Not usually a good thing.
Okay.
Yeah. You want to, what I call meet the bar at the height that you pull it.
Okay.
So this is usually going to be somebody who's taught to jump the bar up, which is a great way to cue somebody to practice using their legs to drive the bar up. But then if they lose contact with the bar, meaning they're not actively keeping weight in their hands and actively staying connected to the bar, often it'll float too high. You've just basically overpulled it or throw it up super high, and then it'll come crashing down on your shoulders. And at lightweight, that might not be a problem, but eventually that's going to make it harder to keep the rack position.
Okay.
So what I'll do is, one, get people to think about, quote unquote, meeting the bar with their chest, or like catching the bar with their chest. Two is that I'll actually have them start thinking about that all the way from their warm-up weight. So you want to, again, meet the bar at the height that you pull it.
Okay.
So
don't drop into a full deep squat if you don't need to.
Initially, when you're using an empty bar, that'll be almost at standing full height. And then as it gets heavier and heavier, you want to continue to track the bar down to the point that you pull it.
Cool.
But that's typically what I'll have people do.
Thanks.
I'm going to ask a question too now, because it's one that I struggle with a lot in coaching. Is I get these intermediate lifters, often younger. For me, it's often younger men, younger, even like teenage or, boys or somebody in their 19, 20, 21, 22, and they're doing power cleans. We have them doing power cleans. They're playing some sort of sport. And they're a decent lifter. Their squat's solid. Their deadlift's solid. They've got good body control. They start to get to a point where the clean gets heavy enough for them the first time they're really linear progressing their clean, that they start to catch their clean standing straight up and with their knees bent and forward, right? So their butt is underneath their shoulders. Their torso is 100% vertical. And their knees are slightly bent, but the knees are forward. Rather than that, go meet the bar where you're in that position where your knees are slightly bent, your butt's back a little bit, and your torso's got a little bit of a forward angle. I mean, they catch it. It's almost like a muscle clean, like where they're not catching it in a quarter squat at all. They're catching it in this like straight up and down, like I'm a stiff soldier, straight up and down, and any bend in my knees are super forward.
Yeah.
And how do you fix that?
What I would probably do with somebody like that is have them maybe do some hang cleans or some drop cleans where they start with the bar basically at their waist and actually just practice pulling down under the weight.
Okay.
So you're kind of eliminating the jump portion and forcing them to think more about getting down
in the right
under the weight
of the rack.
Yeah.
Right.
The other thing I like to have people think about is that I want a missed power clean or a missed snatch to turn into a full clean or snatch.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes along actually with meeting the bar at lower and lower positions as well, because I also like that mindset shift when they go to start cleaning. Even when they're doing a full clean, I still want them to meet the bar. I don't want them to dive bomb under it and then have it crash on them again. So that's kind of the first thing that comes to mind for me. But
what I've been doing, and it's working okay, and I'll be the first to admit that while I've got lots of experience coaching the 4 big lifts we tend to teach, I have less experience coaching the power clean and even less with the power snatch. And I've done both a fair amount, but when someone catches a clean almost like in a muscle clean position and very stiff, what I'll tend to have them do is wherever they catch it, boom, right there, stop. They must then start to write it down into a front squat.
Right. Yes. Yep.
And so if they catch it high and stiff and weird, they can't catch it high and stiff and weird and then finish standing up and then go into a front squat. It's wherever you catch it, wherever you rack it, at that position, the next step is you start writing it down into the front squat.
Yeah.
And what tends to happen is at some point they get to where they're catching it back into that quarter squat position or what would be the beginning of a front squat. And then, of course, the idea there would be at some point they're cleaning heavy enough that you can no longer power clean. You would have to full clean it. And then the catch is that motor pattern is established, that the catch goes into the front squat. So
I like that. And that's, like I was saying earlier, similar idea to practicing meeting the bar when you're warming up your full clean.
That's right.
You're doing that exact thing, except as it's empty bar, it's going to be high. And then as you add more weight, you'll just lower and lower and lower. But you full clean every single time. Yeah.
My good buddy, Derek Benford, got really into Olympic lifting several years ago. I noticed, and this is, I think, a pretty common thing for competitive Olympic weightlifters or people who are really into this, is they'll power clean for as long as they can. They'll work up. They're obviously catching high. They get to heavier versions of their power clean. They're catching a little deeper. They're a little bit above parallel. It's still a power clean, but it's getting close. And they get to the point that they can't officially power clean it anymore, and that's okay. And at that point, they start working up and they just start full cleaning, all in the same workout.
Right.
So it's like, how high can I pull it, catch it high, a little lower, a little lower, a little lower, and eventually and you can do the same thing with power snatch and working into a full snatch. Good. Cool. All right. So this next question, we'll see if it comes out okay.
Oh boy.
Oh no, I think I actually know what this one is.
So first off, get your thinking caps on and pay very close attention, because it's sort of a long algebraic equation.
Algebra.
Yeah, well, we'll see. So question from Ren. You know that classic, what would you rather fight, 100 duck-sized horses or 1 horse-sized duck? This question is vaguely similar, he says.
Okay.
Stay with me. I've read this now like 4 times and I still don't know if I get it. So let's say the impressiveness of a lift is I.
Okay.
Related to how hard it is, obviously. So your 1 rep max, let's say X, has some level of impressiveness.
Is that intensity?
Sure, let's say that's intensity. It's not really impressiveness.
Well, sometimes our highest intensity is not impressive.
That's true. But stay with me.
Okay.
Stay with Ren.
Sorry, Ren.
Isn't Ren part of the Wu-Tang Clan?
I actually don't
Maybe
know.
not.
I should know
this.
that, but
Okay.
I don't.
Ooh,
Let's
so
say the
embarrassed.
impressiveness of a lift is I. So impressiveness is represented by I, which is, kind of related to how hard the lift is. So your 1 rep max X has some level of impressiveness. Therefore, it's I of X.
Okay.
A function of. And your 2 rep max, which he calls Y, also has some I.
Okay.
Y's got I too. Awesome.
Yes. 1 rep max has got I, 2 rep max has got I. And shall we then assume, or we shall assume,
We shall.
that Y is less than X for I to be equal, right? Obviously, your 2 rep max
Mhm.
is potentially a little less I than your 1 rep max.
Yeah.
So like a 600-pound 1 rep max deadlift is impressive, and a 2 rep max deadlift of 500 pounds is also impressive. But which is more impressive? So the question he's actually asking, it's not really supposed to necessarily be a joke or funny, is at what ratio is the 1 rep max and the 2 rep max equally as impressive? I.e., at what number of duck-sized horses is it equal to fighting a single horse-sized duck?
I think it's the most impressive when you do your 1 rep max for 2 reps. And all of a sudden you're like, that's a new thing for me.
which does actually happen.
Yeah, you're like, holy
fairly
crap.
often.
I feel like that's when it's at its peak I.
It happens most often in the deadlift and the press.
Yeah, I can't think of.
So
Yeah.
when you think you're attempting a single and you're like, no, I'm going to go for 2, and it's both at the same time, a single and a double PR. Is that what you're saying?
Well, that would be another level of I.
Well, that would be true,
Yeah.
right? And actually, there was a time, to this day, I think my best set of deadlifts in my entire life was when I pulled 705 for the first time, a raw 705 pull with Kurt Karwoski, the greatest squatter of all time, sitting on a bench right next to me, watching and yelling at me, and a whole bunch of other people. And I was pulling 705 for new 1 rep max, and I pulled it for 1. And then I got to the top and I was like, I can pull this for another one. And I went down and I set my breath and pulled it for 2.
That's awesome.
And so I would go back and say, that's actually the best deadlift of my life. And my best 1 rep max is 725, but I've pulled 705 for a double, which I actually think has got more I than the 725. But the question is not just, I think what he's also asking there is at some point, is there an actual equation that would identify that, a 3 rep max? Well, I actually think there could be. I mean, there are the rep max calculators, and most of those are pretty similar. You can look up your estimated 1 rep max. Now, I think certainly at some point you get to, I think as the reps get higher, the carryover is less and less and less. Like, I don't know. Well, look, Michael Wolf, we were with him just a couple weeks ago, and the guy bench pressed 350 for 10. And I think his best bench press, sorry, Michael Wolf, if I'm getting this wrong, is somewhere in the ballpark of like 450 or 460 or somewhere in that ballpark. So is 450 or 460 for 1 or 350 for 10 more impressive? Well, they're pretty close, right?
Yeah, it's both pretty high level I.
So,
I mean, I don't know of a ratio, but probably out there. You could probably do the math on that.
Yeah. And I think that's what people have done with the rep max calculator. So while that is certainly, you can't count it as if you do whatever, some weight for 10 and you plug it into the rep max calculator and it spits out this number, you can't then claim that number as being your PR.
Right.
But I think it is a pretty good, at least applies some math to how impressive the lift is, because they're pretty close.
Speaking of Karwoski, his 1,000 by 2.
Yeah.
What would the equivalent 1 rep max
that's
impressiveness be?
I don't know.
Jeez.
At that point, it would have had to have been probably 1,100, which I don't think anybody had ever done.
So good.
At that point when he did that, which was about 98 or something, I think it was late 90s.
Yeah.
You're talking about, there were, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 guys who had ever squatted 1,000 pounds. And I don't believe anyone who had ever squatted 1,000 pounds for 2. And so, he had 1,003 on the bar, I think. So, and then did it for a double, which again was not the plan. I don't believe it was the plan at all. Yeah. Good question. Fun to think about. Yeah. Obviously. Don't know that we have a hard and fast answer, but probably, there's certainly things that you can use to give you some feedback there. So he says, love the podcast, by the way. Smart move. Thanks, Ren. All right. Question from Jay on pressing. He's considering Pavel Tatsulin, right?
Not Tatooine, which I always thought it was.
Tattooing, which is a cool name. His old mantra of to press a lot, you have to press a lot. And based off that, he has a few questions. Primarily, the question is, why isn't there greater pressing frequency in the kind of standard orthodox LP? And what does a lot actually mean? What do you think?
So first question is, why isn't there more? I think it's time constraint. The LP is really geared towards that new lifter that's coming in and trying to build the habit of training and having something that they can get in and out of in less than an hour initially, and hits all of the main compound movements, I think is beneficial for most people starting out.
And like if they started out and they were just like, I want to press more, there might be actually more press volume in their LP.
You could absolutely
But if it's just like the general novice who needs to get generally more strong.
It's simple.
Yeah.
It's easy to follow.
Yep.
I've actually been going more and more often towards picking one or the other to prioritize and having that be a twice a week, always twice a week, one or the other. And I'm tending towards benching twice a week and pressing as a light day. Personally,
higher stress.
Why are you tending to lean into bench press?
I actually picked this up from talking to Becca, that she's been able to build more general strength faster that actually benefits the press more by getting the bench up first.
Okay.
And then bringing in more pressing.
Yeah.
Because most people can lift more weight on the bench.
Interesting.
So,
well, obviously,
right.
All people can bench more than they can press.
Right. Yeah. Good point. So, second question, how much is a lot? I think if you're really prioritizing press, there's at least 4 slots. There's probably 4 slots
of overhead pressing
in a week. Yeah.
Wow.
Three or
I'd
4.
Say that is a lot.
That's a lot.
And like
that's
a bench?
Probably some benching as well. Yeah. As accessory slots. But yeah, 3 to 4 slots a week.
Of overhead pressing.
Yeah, some version of it. It doesn't. I'm not saying you're always going max effort heavy.
No, I get it. Sure,
could be
pin presses.
Like how you're doing 2 squat slots in one session. You could do something similar to that. Where I'm not saying you're pressing even 4 times a week.
Yeah,
but there's 4 slots.
Yeah, that would probably make me want to quit lifting.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to press overhead press I wouldn't want to do any lift 4 times a week. There's no lift that I would want to do 4 times a week.
This is another worldview shift that I think I have that's different coming from my background, where weightlifters train twice a day,
super high frequency,
and they're doing pretty much almost every lift.
Very high frequency
every single day.
Yep.
So
all right, so I'm going to say something that might be considered heretical among the community here, but I continue to lean towards, I love a 4-day split LP. The more I use it, the more I like it. I like squatting and deadlifting twice a week and bench pressing and pressing twice a week. Although I always press first on the upper body days. I press and then I bench press. And there's several reasons for that. But one is that the vast majority of people that I'm working with have some amount of experience on the bench press. So the bench press is a little further along than their press is. For most of them, they haven't ever really overhead pressed, but everybody kind of bench presses at some point in their career. I think that for me, and some of this is like me carrying over my personal, if I press first, it makes my shoulders feel good, and the bench press then feels fine. I don't feel like it detracts from the bench press very much, except for my triceps can get tired by the time I get to the end of the bench press. The other way around, the bench press seems to kind of tighten everything up, and then I have a harder time getting a good lockout on the press, which I kind of struggle with anyway, because it's hard to get really opened up. And so I'm starting a lot of my clients pressing twice a week, bench pressing twice a week, squatting twice a week, and deadlifting twice a week. And so what you're losing is that third squat in the beginning. And I would agree that at least for a while, you're able to make that constant linear progression, squatting 3 times a week. And I understand that we've decided to there's got to be a trade-off. It's a budget. But for me and my clients lately, it's been something I've been playing around with, and I like it. I'm not saying that it's superior to the 3-day traditional LP where you're alternating the bench and the press. I just like it. I think it also works better with the open slots that you potentially have for accessory work. I think that the workouts end up being significantly shorter by only having to do 2 main lifts a day and then maybe a little bit of accessory as opposed to 3. So
let me go back and clarify where my perspective was coming from. I'm assuming this person is really wanting to drive their press up and it's not an LP
Oh yeah.
beginner, right?
Right.
Mhm.
And number two, they're probably competitive. So they're wanting to do 1RMs or singles.
Sure.
So a big part of the reason I'm saying it needs to be 3, maybe even 4, is that there's a skill aspect to it. So at least one of those slots is probably more like a practice slot than it is, a strength slot.
Yep.
And second part question, how often were you working overhead as a strongman, as an example?
Twice a week and always first.
Yeah.
Because you never bench press in strongman. That was the biggest change about my training was when I first converted from powerlifting to strongman, I could bench almost right at 405 was my raw bench max as a powerlifter before I started strongman. So that would have been 2005. When I switched to press, I can remember my very first press workout, I could not press. I missed a 185 press, but I had a 405 bench press.
Wow.
I mean, that's
Wow.
a major deficiency.
Yeah.
When you say twice a week, that includes all of the, log work or,
So what it
skill
typically
work.
was a straight, normal barbell, strict overhead, quote unquote, military
Mhm.
press. Pretty strict, always with a barbell. And then the other time a week would have been with a log or an axle or something like that. And I'm not counting anything where might have been some overhead medley type stuff. Like at the end of a workout, we might do stuff, where you had to press kegs overhead, for one, so you run through.
Yes,
but
this is what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so there would be some of
would
that.
be a slot, I would consider.
yeah, but that was
okay.
more skill based. I mean, I felt like
Exactly.
pressing 160 pound.
Matt's proving your point.
Yes,
here.
he is. This is exactly
No,
where I
it
wanted
makes
to-
sense.
Yeah.
It makes sense. It's just so you would do a medley that had different things, but pressing 160 pound keg over your head.
Right.
When you were at the point where you could press 300 pound barbell or log or axle, it wasn't the press itself that was holding you back. It was the awkwardness of the keg.
Sure.
And so it was more of the skill development there to do that stuff. So, yeah, I mean, so I think ultimately we agree that if you are past a novice and early intermediate phase and you really want to bring up a lift, one of the best ways to really bring up the lift is to add frequency to the lift.
Yep.
Mhm.
Like you just give that lift more frequency and it tends to do better. Now, you can't do high volume on every time you do it.
Sure.
And you can't do high intensity every time you do it. That's really what that theory of daily undulating periodization has come from. It was that there were these, you would do usually, like traditionally there in that style, is you would do one time heavy, you do one time light for volume, and you do one time kind of medium for strength. And I think that tends to be what a lot of people follow. So, yeah, good?
Yep.
All right. Question from Jason for his wife. This is always dangerous. I haven't read the question yet.
Lululemon.
I'm already
The answer is
extremely
Lululemon.
skeptical.
His wife has experienced hip flexor pain while squatting. Couldn't get to depth without pain. Felt like her, quote, hip bones were pinching her muscles in the hip flexor area. He advised a wider stance and toes angled out slightly more to adjust this, lessen the pain, but then it reappeared later. His specific questions, is there a solution we don't see, or is it just an anatomical roadblock? Is there an alternative squat we should be trying, like a high bar, front squat, etc.?
The one thing that I look for when this pops up is the timing of setting the back angle on the descent. She might be going down upright initially and not bending over soon enough. And if that happens, there can definitely be like some interaction there that causes that kind of pain. So make sure that knees are going out, hips are going back, and chest is going down right away so that like you just really clear the area for your torso to kind of lean over. I also have found it can be more outside gym stuff that aggravates that hip flexor area. Like if you don't see that timing being off in the beginning, it's like if she's walking a lot, like people who do box jumps, they always get pretty beat up on the hip flexors because what we do really doesn't, like you're not pulling yourself down anywhere. So those are the only things that I know about.
Would you recommend trying a more open hip angle squat variant at any point?
Like a high bar front squat.
Yeah. Which is what he asked.
Worth a shot. I don't know. I honestly think that sometimes like a wider stance and leaning over more can be more helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'd agree. As a last resort, sometimes that's what you got to do. If you just can't close the hip angle as much as we tend to teach, and we've tried everything at some point, then you've got to do a squat that has a more open hip angle. Like that's sort of logical. I guess the question is, probably, and of course we're not doctors and we haven't seen her and we don't know exactly what's going on here, but typically when you feel pain in this area, it's usually one of two things. We've got a soft tissue impingement issue where the soft tissue is getting impinged there between the femur and acetabulum in that area. And I think that's the most common thing we see. If it feels muscular, if it feels like the pain is right, if you could kind of dig on it with a lacrosse ball and it makes it feel significantly better, that's probably what we're dealing with. And so there probably are some of those form things that you can change with the stance and the how much we bend over or not. I think and a lot of times it's just experimentation to make sure you get to the right spot to figure out what works. The other issue, though, that is the thing that I thought was what I had for a long time, is that there is a deeper sort of grindy pain that you'll feel it's really the beginnings of osteoarthritis in your hip. And if you get that, there's really nothing you can do to actually fix the thing. I mean, people have shallow hip sockets or hip sockets that are not actual spheres. They're more like eggs. They're oval. So there's less space to actually move the femoral head within the socket of the hip. And if that's the case, you also can still play around with stance. You guys have watched me, and people make fun of me for having the frog stance squat, but it's the only
made fun of you, man.
Well, I mean, you know what I mean. It's just
you give me their phone numbers.
Will you stand up for me?
Yeah.
Thanks, helicopter parent Niki. But it's one of those things. You do what you got to do to get in a position to actually try to move through the best range of motion that you possibly can. But ultimately, I'm never going to fix my osteoarthritis, right? I'm not impinging soft tissue.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm not in just the right spot, I'm grinding bone on bone, and that's different.
Yeah.
So
the description I've heard, though, I would definitely be looking for things like Niki said, is the back
Agreed.
angle not getting set. The other thing that it might come in as a secondary symptom, it might look like knee slide at the bottom, which is really not getting bent over and the knee set at the beginning.
Yeah.
So might want to try looking for some of those.
Mm-hmm.
And you could also try, there may be some variants that you might want to try to do some work and eliminate variables like maybe a pause or a tempo variant to see if maybe slowing it down helps either correct some of those movement issues or control the squat better.
Yes.
Yeah. Or at least tells you right where you feel it the most.
Right.
yes,
Mhm.
which is super important.
Yeah.
Yes. Pinning down exactly. Is she feeling it at the bottom during the bounce, or is it happening somewhere in between? And then as another alternative in the meantime is maybe doing some lunges instead of a squat variant, so you can still get some work done.
Well, and what does the lunge do for the hip flexor?
Nothing other than getting more work. Sorry, I'm stretching it out maybe a little bit.
It's actually because you'll get a good stretch, right?
Yeah.
So the thing about a lunge is that what is essentially the back leg, the hip flexor is going to take a big stretch there.
Yep.
And so sometimes that is helpful too, especially if there's impingement going on, to just sort of pull it kind of out of that spot and just, not that I think it's staying clamped down in that impingement, but to just give it a stretch. So
I don't know if I agree with that.
Okay, why?
Because the bend knee is just, the hip flexor on that side is totally getting smushed.
It is getting smushed.
But you typically have a more vertical back angle with a lunge. So you have a more open hip angle.
No, that's a great point. Have you felt hip flexor impingement on
I
lunges?
totally have, because it's also more difficult to keep your knee out. It's like way more likely that your knee is going to swing towards the midline in the front.
Yeah.
And I think that can flare up the hip flexor. But that probably really does depend a lot on how you're built.
Sure.
Yeah.
Here's another variant. If the pinch is happening at the bottom, would be an extreme case, but you could set the pins up and do an Anderson squat. You could set the pins up at a height where you're just above parallel,
right?
If the pinch is at the bottom, and then just stand the squat back up from the bottom.
Why would you want to start from the bottom? Why couldn't you just do a pin squat?
If it's happening, a pin squat, because it might be happening from the squishing like you're talking about. So you're allowing the squat to start from a point where it's not opening, instead of closing.
The very first part of the squat is the open instead of the close. That's good.
Back to the beginning, although I'm glad to hear that he tried widening his stance first. I have heard this is a common for all you husbands asking questions for their wives or who are trying to convince them to squat. The protocol for teaching somebody to squat is typically to set the heels up at shoulder width apart. But for many women, that is not optimal because their shoulders are typically narrower than the hips.
Needs to be a little wider.
So something to keep an eye out there, that I've seen a lot of women set up too narrow of a stance.
That's a good observation. Okay. Is it quick fire round time?
2 questions left, and they're both kind of semi-funny. So names left out. here.
Oh,
I'm going to shoot this question on Niki first. I think it'd be more fun.
At least semi-fun.
Are there any deadlift variations or sequence of accessory exercises that have the same benefits as the deadlift, but that my penis can tolerate? I.e., I have short arms and the bar comes over my junk. So, yeah,
first off, it is funny that you directed that question to Niki, because this came up in our Slack conversation like a couple months ago.
Right.
Somebody posted like, I cannot figure out why this guy just keeps looping the bar around towards the lockout. And Niki immediately was like, oh, it's because he's running over his dick.
Yeah. Once you see it, it's like one of those things where you only need to see it once.
One's all you need.
That's right.
Okay. I'm hoping you've tried out wearing compression shorts, because that can actually help quite a bit. Deadlift variations. I might actually try like a floating deadlift. And a floating deadlift is when you pick it up. Technically, you're supposed to bring it to the top and then like back down to mid shin and come back up. But I might actually have you just stop before you get to the top. And like your lockout
like a
position. Would be just like we would call it.
I love that she's, because there's no way, I mean, you have no experience on what this might feel like.
But I think about it a lot.
Yeah.
But man, you got a deadlift, right? Unfortunately, there are a fair number of people that this has to happen with,
Yes.
right?
Very average amount.
Right. And the way, honestly, like the logical way to fix it is to, it's the sports bra fix, right? For women who clean and smack the crap out of their breast tissue. So it's what you want to do is you want to compress as much as you can the junk in the middle, and you want to build up the girth of the quads.
Oh,
so that they stay. So
that's
like,
really smart. I never thought about that.
Nice.
Yeah.
So if your arms are short and your legs are skinny, then we got a problem. But the thicker your legs get, then the bar's going to slide up the quads. And
they're like a fortress now.
Yeah.
Wait, he did say that he had short arms. It wasn't something else?
No, short arms.
Okay.
Short arms.
What about sumo?
Yeah, you could.
I don't know, man. I've pulled sumo. I feel like you usually have to have your hands wider.
Really?
And when I say I pulled sumo, I did it for like 3 weeks and I hated it. But like
2 workouts.
But I ran into my own legs so much that it was just like with my hands, it was just, I hated it.
Yeah.
Like, and it's weird to get your hands in the right spot. I don't know.
Yeah.
So that's another thing. Get your grip as narrow as you can, because that'll artificially lengthen your arms.
As straight arms as you can.
For sure.
The straighter your arms are, the longer they're going to hang.
Yeah.
You could also try hook grip. Hopefully they're doing that already.
You could try rounding the thoracic a little bit, right? Like it's not absolutely necessary to have a fully extended thoracic spine. So you might be able to round the upper back a little bit while keeping the lumbar perfectly in extension. And really, seriously, even for me, and my arms are plenty long, so this is not an issue, but I like to have slick compression shorts and then normal shorts on top of the compression shorts, because what will happen is the bar it'll slide up, it'll kind of grab the shorts and the bar will slide up. And what you're really looking for is to allow the bar to slide. The more it can slide and it doesn't get caught on a thing. So it literally could be as simple as like the fabric of the things that you're wearing make it that much worse, right? So, I mean, I get it. Thanks for asking the question. Obviously, it makes sense that you're anonymous in this, but there are a lot of people out there that have to deal with these weird sort of things. Same, and really, I try to keep it as mature as I can, but I've met many women who have had the same problem in like power cleans, and they would wear literally 2 sports bras, like sports bra and another sports bra, to just kind of, because, you know, when you're trying to do a power clean, you're trying to keep the bar as close to your body. You talked about it earlier in the episode, as close to the body as you can. Well, that's a real problem if you've got gigantic boobs. They're in the way. And so there's just like, you've got to do the best you can to work around it. So good. Last question, super short. Question from Billy. Matt, when did you start wearing a hat when you lift, and why do you wear a hat when you lift?
Oh, Matt doesn't wear a hat. Oh.
So, interestingly enough, for those of you guys that have followed for quite some time, for the first 39, 40 years of my life, I wore a hat every single day, no matter where I was at all times. I was wearing a hat unless I absolutely was at a place too formal to wear a hat. I would wear a hat. And now I never wear a hat unless I work out.
Right.
And I wear a hat when I work out. Do you guys know why I wear a hat when I
Because
train?
you sweat so
The sweat.
much.
Because I sweat so much, specifically from my forehead.
Right.
I'm not a super sweaty person. I sweat from my face and I sweat from my upper back. I know you look at me as though, but here's why you
And
think
the top of your head is.
well, here's why you
definitely
think that I'm super sweaty, because the most noticeable place that someone can be very sweaty is their face and their head. If there's sweat constantly dripping off like their eyebrows, it's so clear. Whereas like, again, I've had buddies that like they traditionally sweat from their ass crack all the time. Well, like that's not actually real noticeable.
Swamp ass is,
you're like
is
that
a real
swamp
problem.
I don't sweat there at all.
Oh,
My
yeah.
armpits don't sweat. I don't even think my armpits sweat as much as normal guys do. But my forehead and my upper back profusely sweat. So if I train and I don't wear a hat,
So you profusely sweat, but you're not a very sweaty person.
Only
I
on the face
profusely
and
sweat
head.
from certain areas of my body.
The most visible.
Yeah.
It
from
must
my
be
forehead
some
and
sort
my
of
upper back.
evolutionary
yes, I'm sure
thing.
I sweat. I am a sweaty person. Yes, I sweat more than most. Yes, I'm hot all the time. But the problem is that I sweat so much from my forehead.
It is the middle of January, and you have been sweating all day, every day.
And what's crazy, you guys have seen this. I've lost a fair amount of weight. My
He's not a
waist is
sweaty
down. My waist is down significantly. I'm eating pretty clean. I'm not really over drinking. Like the kind of things that would cause that to be worse is in a pretty good place right now in my life. And I'm still, and here's the thing, my brother, who we had posted before and after pictures of in the last couple weeks at Barbell Logic, the guy's just as lean as he could possibly be. Barbell Logic client, the guy weighs, 220. 220 is what he is now. 220, 215, super lean. He's like, still sweats all the time. It's just in our
Not a very
genetics.
sweaty
My
person.
dad's
Reynolds are just not sweaty people.
They're not very sweaty.
no, we're very sweaty people. So thanks for asking. That's why I do it. My dad would wear a sweatband, even up until the last,
For sure.
even recently, like the most, like when he was training a few years ago before he got sick, he would wear a legit sweatband for the reason of to keep the sweat from running down his face.
That's why they were made.
Why
Yeah.
not? And so why not sweatband for yourself?
I just
why the
feel
baseball
weird. A
cap?
sweatband feels a little strange.
I feel like after 50, it's going to happen.
Yeah, it probably would. I mean, you get to that point where you just don't care. That's why you put on Speedos and stuff at some point. The next step, I guess,
We're
is
almost there.
is
So,
sweatband.
we're already
Speedo
there.
and sweatband seems like it'd be a great combo, actually.
The wrist cuffs that are
That's what I
sweat,
need.
Then you
sweat
can do
So
this.
you can wipe.
Yeah.
That's the good stuff.
All right. Thank you guys for your questions. Hope you guys had some fun listening, guys and gals, listening to our whatever, our bantering back and forth about these Q&As. We always have a great time when we get together. We hope you guys do too. This really is similar to the conversations that we have even when we're not recording. So
true.
if you ever wonder what it's like to hang out in the living room, Matt and Nikki and Andrew are just hanging out and talking, it's pretty much this. It's pretty much what we do.
It's
We
true.
make funny
And
jokes. And
more of Matt sweating.
so it's just that, yeah, I'm a little more sweaty. and so thanks for listening. Please continue to send your questions. We love hearing those, and give us a 5-star review if you like the podcast and it brings you value. We'd always love to have those and say nice things. Feedback is encouraged for sure. And we'll see you next week. I think we got the mental health series coming up.
Ooh,
Oh, cool.
Pretty
Sweet.
excited. So as fun
Yeah.
as we've had today and kicked around and jokes and whatnot and some kindergarten humor, we've got a really important series coming up about the value of mental health and the way strength training relates to it, coming at you next week. So we'll
Cool.
see you then.
All right.
Later, everyone.
Bye.